What's going on, guys? Welcome back to 8-Bits Video Game Book Club. We're powered by Audio Technica as we replay some of the finest releases in gaming history. I'm your host, Jono, Pech, and joining me, we have Paul James. His hair's not quite as spiky as our Final Fantasy protagonists, but he's here anyway.
Look, there's some length to it, but yeah, spike, not so much. So it's good to be back, though.
It is good to talk games with Paul James. So thanks to Bandai Namco and the Reunion re-release, we are winding the clock back to 2008 for Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII. This is a review with a bit of a twist, so we're looking at how this game has aged over the years, as well as the improvements that they've made in this new generational remaster, if you will. So we'll talk a little bit about our experiences with the game. I'm a massive Final Fantasy VII fiend. Like, that's been one of my favorite games for always, but I never had a PSP, so I didn't even really know about this Crisis Core game coming out until one of my friends just showed me their PSP as they were like passing through town, and they had the game, and I watched the intro and I was like, okay, that's interesting, but I never played it, like never touched it, didn't even really know the story or how it connected until playing like Final Fantasy Remake, and that, you know, I guess mild...
People start connecting him, talking about him, yeah.
Mild spoilers, but Zack's story is more significant in the remake than it was in the original, where he comes into the game much later on. So that gave me this extra interest in playing Crisis Core. And, you know, when PlayStation announced that they were doing the PS Plus Deluxe thing and adding like old PSP games, I was like, sweet, I'm finally maybe going to get a chance to play Crisis Core without a PSP. And I didn't need to, because they remade it with this Reunion re-release, which is perfect for what I wanted, with, you know, all the updates and
graphical tweaks and gameplay tweaks and all those sorts of things.
Yeah, the quality of life improvements that just make it a bit more playable for the modern generation. But yeah, that's my experience with the game. Coming here fresh, never having played it, you've got a very different story.
Yeah, and firstly, I guess to that point about it actually being available, you know, the hopes of it being available through PlayStation Plus or whatever, I was pretty adamant that was never going to happen, because Square Enix never actually put out a digital version of the game. Like, my hope was always one day they just go, let's just release it somehow so you can play it on the Vita. But no, you could never download the PSP version and play it on your Vita, because it was only a physical cart and that was it.
Yeah.
So good one, Square Enix. But yeah, my memories of the game, like you, go way back with Final Fantasy VII itself. It's not the best Final Fantasy, that is 9, and I can't wait for them to announce that remake sometime this year, because that was an Nvidia leak thing. That and Final Fantasy Tactics are the only things from that leak, Final Fantasy wise, that haven't actually come true yet. So whilst everything else has come true from that leak, so it's only a matter of time.
Yeah, the Nvidia leak's like the gift that keeps on giving to games journos. Exactly.
You're just always sweating on the next thing to break out from it, and when something starts to trickle out, you know it's true, because it was in the Nvidia leak. But I played the game back on the PSP right when it came out. I picked up the PSP for God of War: Chains of Olympus, so I had the console ready when Crisis to play Crisis Core as well, and that for me was, so I would catch a train for about an hour each way per day to go to uni, and that was the perfect material for the train. Like, I get motion sickness in a car, but I can sit in the train and play a game no problem for whatever reason. So I would just slide into the seat, have my feet on the seat, get told off for putting my feet on the seat, and probably inevitably do it again later on, because I just forget about it and I got so sucked into Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core. So my experience was back and forth train trips, chipping it away an hour at a time, and then obviously a big binge at home or whatever when I wasn't studying for uni or doing other usual uni things, i.e. drinking and not sleeping. Brilliant. So good times, and loved the game as well. So many fond memories of that game. As we're putting together the doc, and you cited the Metacritics for it, and I go, oh, really? Was it that low? I couldn't. I mean, 83 is a good score, but I thought more highly of Crisis Core than I did the core Final Fantasy VII, and that's not to disparage Final Fantasy VII, because it's excellent. Again, not 9, but it's excellent. but I was even more of a fan of Crisis Core than the core game itself. And that was, I think, just like the change of format, and I guess this kind of jumps into some of the points that we'll discuss shortly, but it was the way they changed what was typically Final Fantasy, and it felt fresh and interesting, and that was at a point in my gaming life where I was actually, my tastes were starting to change a little bit. I had been very much traditional JRPGs, platformers, and like your Zelda-style action games for my entire life up to that point. But 2007, 2008, that period is when Crisis Core and God of War and those sort of things were coming out, was when I got a PS3. I'd finished school, so I was had an income, which means I didn't have to just focus on whatever games. Like, Mum was constantly fueling my love of JRPGs, but she didn't have any interest of anything outside of that, and so that's where things remained.
Interesting.
But then when I got my PS3, I picked up Resistance, I picked up Uncharted, I started dabbling in other genres. There was more character action games that started to emerge, and Crisis Core kind of leans into that a little bit more than the traditional Final Fantasy experience. So it was speaking to me through that lens as well. It came along at a perfect time for me.
Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. I think there's things about it that feel really modern compared to, obviously, like a game that came out about 10 years prior to it in Final Fantasy VII. I think there's ways that it falls short of Final Fantasy VII. Like, I don't think the story in this one's as compelling or as complete or as good, just overall good. But we can get to all that stuff
that's fair.
a bit later. Yeah. So just to wind the clock back to 2008 when this thing landed, what were the big movies, TV shows, and games of that year? So we had Benjamin Button hitting the big screen. We had Indiana Jones' last appearance, which shows how old this is, with Crystal Skull. The Dark Knight. Iron Man was, the first of the MCU films to come out, so that makes you feel pretty old.
Oh.
On the small screen, we had the first season of Breaking Bad. We were right in the middle of The Office, Lost, 30 Rock, Entourage,
The GOAT, Lost.
How I Met Your Mother, Scrubs, Mad Men, and House. What a time for TV. They're some of my favourite shows. What did you say was the GOAT?
Lost. The Office is right up there as well. You can't go wrong with The Office. But
mate, I'm a big Lost fan over here.
Can't wait to go down that well again sometime soon.
Yeah, for sure. And then in video games, the ones that I jotted down were Dead Space, which feels topical because of the re-release. GTA 4 landed that year. Smash Bros. Brawl, Metal Gear Solid 4, Fallout 3. Pretty solid just list of 5 or 6 games there, and this amongst them makes it another pretty good year for games. Yeah,
there's some great stuff across all different sorts of media there. It was a good year to be consuming any of those different sort of things, even music. Lots of great stuff from that period, I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
For me, again, late teens, early 20s. You're probably exploring the most musically at that particular time. But
how old were you in 2008?
I would have been 19.
Yep. I was 21 by the end of the year, and that was my last year of uni. So it was like coming out of uni when I had all the time to play video games, which was a lot of Fallout 3. Yeah.
Yeah, no, still not a Fallout guy. It's just not going to work for me. So bring on Starfield because it's something different.
All right. So Paul, you mentioned 83 was the original Metacritic score. This remake or whatever we're going to call this landed at 79, so slightly less. But how did you find the experience to revisit Crisis Core after all these years? Obviously, as we said, a fresh take on a modern console.
Baffling that the original score was as low as it is. Baffling that the remaster, remake, hybrid, whatever we want to call it, is even lower. But whatever, who cares? People are entitled to be wrong. So yeah, I mean, look, I obviously highlighting already that I'm a big fan of the game in the first place. So I was relishing the opportunity to play it again. I was screaming and shouting about this when Remake first came out in 2020. Like this has to happen. This is a matter. Like it's only a matter of time. It's going to. So I was adamant it was going to happen at some point. Thrilled that it finally did. And as I said, it's one of my favorite Final Fantasies. So really eager to jump into it. But I mean, you got things like the old CG things, and it's the same thing that, and I guess it's when we are discussing is this a remake, is it a remaster? It's the thing that for me tips it back towards the remaster side, because your remasters when they come out, developers struggle to do anything with the old CG cutscenes. It's either remake them entirely or they look off in comparison.
Yeah,
and that's exactly what's happened here with Crisis Core. They've put a little bit of love into it. Like, you can see there's some effort, but they didn't rebuild those cutscenes in any way, and so they stand out when you compare it to the. I mean, it's not of the caliber of remake, but the visuals in this Crisis Core Reunion look fantastic. It really pops.
Yeah,
and you wouldn't believe it was a PSP game when you see it.
No, when I watched the intro, even the CG cutscenes that you're a bit down on, I was really impressed, and I kind of had to go, wait a second, what did these look like on the PSP? And I went back and watched like a YouTube video of like the opening train scene, and I was like, man, the PSP must have been a lot more powerful than I thought.
Oh yeah, look, it was pretty good.
These cutscenes look pretty good for that time,
especially because it's the small screen. It actually loses a bit when you watch it on a bigger screen through YouTube, where it's been scaled in a way that's not meant to be scaled in the first place. So
yeah, but
that's certainly
I
an interesting aspect.
Yeah, so I was impressed with what they were able to do with those, and parts of the game almost feel like modern, like as without having it right next to 7 Remake. Like, in my head, it's like, yeah, this is like close to it at least, which I thought was impressive. And as far as the comparison to the original, which I haven't played, but just like the composition of those cutscenes and like the action, like it all felt pretty cutting edge, especially for what would have been 2008. You've had cutscenes in games for a while, but they definitely seemed more more modern than like some of the ones that I'd been used to seeing around that time. Going back to like GTA 4, like the GTA games prior to that, the Metal Gear games prior to that. Yeah.
I mean, there was definitely a flex going on from Square Enix when it comes to that, because people had already been screaming for years about a Final Fantasy VII remake. Keep in mind, by the time that this game came out, there'd already been that Final Fantasy VII tech demo for the PS3.
Yes, yeah.
Which was only ever going to be a tech demo, but of course people lost their minds over it. It did. It looked amazing for what it was. But there was already a bit of a tone set, and so even though they were going to the PSP, they really had to try and squeeze everything they could out of it, and they absolutely did. Those cutscenes, for the time looked amazing, and they lose a bit, I think, when they get stretched across a bigger screen, which is kind of what happens, I think, when you watch it on YouTube on your computer, or even despite the work that they've put into it, even when I think you watch it in this reunion remaster. But they did some incredible things back in the day with that.
Yeah. Overall, the experience of playing the game, I found it a bit disjointed between what was dated and what was fresh. And I couldn't tell if that was like these things that are fresh because they've been revamped, or if that was what it was originally like. So you're probably in a better place to talk to that aspect as far as the mechanics and some things that feel a bit janky and some things that feel really good.
Well, what was it for you? Because again, I mean, there probably is that degree of rose-tinted glasses for me, where it probably feels smoother back in the day than what it actually was. So if you start citing things, I can probably tell you what I think I'm in a better position there to tell you. Okay, I know this changed versus this and that.
Let's save that for what holds up the worst, because I've got a few things there to talk about, but we'll
then I can fill in a couple blanks then. So for example, like on that gameplay side, the stance, like they added there's kind of a different stance that comes in later in the piece, like that's totally new. And I think in some ways kind of makes the back end of the game a bit easier as well, in terms of how you can kind of utilize that to kind of bash and crash through in ways that you couldn't during the original, like in the original Crisis Core. And then I think a lot of it after that is just purely polished, like they've really tweaked and refined collision and all those sorts of basic fundamentals that you can do when you're going and remastering / I think in that component almost remaking a game, that they can fix up a lot of those sort of things and make it feel smoother, make the collision reliable in ways it wasn't on the more primitive platform.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Okay, so getting into the categories, Paul, what do you see here as the most iconic sequence of this game?
Oh, I mean, I think most people agree. I know you don't, having seen your choice there, but it's the ending. And I think even more so now. I think there's an extra layer of context that goes into it for anyone who's played Remake. And knowing that, as you said, and spoilers, people, for Final Fantasy VII Remake, it is very clear that Zack is going to play a far greater role in this thing, and is potentially going to be talking alongside key characters. It's kind of how I'm potentially reading some of that situation.
It's possible. We'll say it's possible. Yeah.
Yeah, it's sorry, that is me putting a layer of my own speculation in there, but it's like they're obviously deviating from the path, and so I think as a result, Zack is going to play a much greater role, which is obviously not the case in the core Final Fantasy VII, and so to release it even as they have at this point kind of reminds people of like, this is a very definitive end for this character, and the way, and now we're obviously wading into spoilers for Crisis Core, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Like there was no coming back from this, and the way Cloud kind of absorbs and becomes Zack in lots of weird ways that he, like, from that moment, is really, really fascinating. I think I think the backdrop of where we're at now with the Final Fantasy VII remakes even adds to the ending of Crisis Core more so now than what I already thought of very highly in the past.
Yeah, definitely. It's like having played 7 Remake before this, I was waiting for that scene, and I thought it was going to come a bit sooner in the game, closer to the sequence that I'm going to mention. But when it did happen, I was like, yeah, this is familiar. This is what it has been alluded to at that section of Remake. So yeah, I can see that being a good and maybe the expected response for most iconic sequence.
Yeah, very cliche, I think, for me.
For me, and this is probably totally coming from the fact that I'm such a big Final Fantasy VII fan, but it was the Nibelheim sequence, which is the part that I was waiting for, basically, because that's what I know about Zack before I played this game, because playing 7, you know that he comes into this town and there's a whole lot of unreliable narrator stuff happening in 7 that later is shown that Zack was around. But seeing Sephiroth in that town, seeing him interacting with Genova, and you're at the reactor and burning the village down with that iconic shot of him walking through the fire. Like, that's what I'm thinking of. That's why it's, for me, the most iconic sequence.
And I don't blame you in the slightest, really. Like, any sequence across 7 and Crisis Core, when you go to Nibelheim, is amazing.
Like,
they do not muck that up.
Yeah, that's arguably like the most iconic sequence of 7. So it feels to me like natural that it would be the most iconic one here. And like added to that is like the coming to fruition of seeing that scene reanimated 10 years later with more powerful hardware and more textures and polygons and all that stuff compared to the CG sequences that we had on the PS1. So I think for people that played Crisis Core at release, it would have been like a huge moment of like, oh my gosh, it looks so like good compared to
so real.
Yeah, it's so realistic. It's photo real. It can't get any better than this. And I know, like, again, if that sequence happens in a Final Fantasy VII remake sequel, it's going to be the same thing all over again. So that for me was iconic, and that was what I was waiting for.
I feel like they're obliged to have to do it. Like, even if it doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense, they've just got to somehow have him peeking out through a burning building, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So what did you feel like was the most 2000s thing or moment in this game? Because, flip phones, as soon as they showed up, I was like, okay, this game was definitely released in 2008. Is there anything else that says 2000s as much as the flip phone?
Well, yeah, I mean, in our doc there, like, I just purely seconded what you had there. And look, they were on the money. Like, I distinctly remember playing my PSP and then flipping out my flip phone and sending an SMS, and that's about all I could do at the time. With the thing, so like they hit the nail on the head in terms of the devices of the day, but obviously it sticks out a bit more now in 2022,
Yeah,
2023.
it's quite funny to see it included though, because it puts the game at a certain point in phone technology.
Yeah.
Where like I can't remember if they used phones in Remake, but did they have flip phones in Remake? Because they've kind of made it canon now that they have flip phones.
It's kind of it's set in 2008. Like that's it's I'd have to go and play Remake again, which I'll 100% do before Rebirth comes out, hopefully at the end of this year. I don't think that'll happen, but hopefully at the end of the year. Look, I mean the way Zach speaks, I mean, that obviously sticks right out in terms of just kind of some of the vernacular of the time.
Yeah.
And kind of the cool sort of language that he's using.
Do you think there's anything gameplay-wise that's like that you came across and you're like, oh, that reminds me of what games were like in the 2000s?
No, because really, I guess kind of, and maybe that was just because of where I was at with my gaming, but like, I guess for a JRPG, like Crisis Core was really tip of the spear in terms of what it was trying to do with that action-based combat. Final Fantasy 12 was a bit more, and that was a couple of years prior. That was kind of far more action-centric, but even then you'd still be able to pause and delegate what you wanted them to do. You had the Gambit system that would then oversee what your party members would do. So, and as a result, a lot of people kind of complained that game felt very automated as a result. Like you just load up your Gambits and then take your hands off the control and just let the combat play out. But whereas this, really felt tip of the spear. So
the
gameplay doesn't feel of its time. It feels like it's 5 years earlier than what it maybe should be.
I totally agree with you there. Like, this question leads straight into the next one. What holds up the best? And for me, it's, as far as the gameplay goes, it's that actionified materia system. The materia system of Final Fantasy VII I love because of how simple it is compared to a lot of other Final Fantasy VII games. I just hate when they overcomplicate all that stuff, and 8 is like the prime example to me of stuffing it up. I played it for the first time really last year, and I was like, what are they doing?
The junction system's awful.
The draw system and the GF system, and like having to like reallocate all these abilities each. Anyway, we're not here to talk about like why Final Fantasy VIII is
one of the worst.
Is bad, but I love that they kept the materia system, but they found a way to make it action oriented instead of turn based. By allocating each button to a different move, it really makes you carefully select which materia you're going to have. You're going to have magic abilities, healing, physical abilities, something that increases your stats like a HP plus or something. You really have to think about like what the boss fight is and what's going to give you the best abilities to exploit the enemy. So I really like
getting your teeth kicked in the first place, and then
definitely
then return.
This isn't coming up in any of what we're talking about, but did you experience any difficulty spikes in the game? I think there was only one boss that I was like, man, this really jumped up a level.
Not playing Reunion. I certainly felt it more back in the day, but that would have been. I don't know. It's hard to qualify why that was. Was it because I wasn't super familiar, and comfortable with the mode of combat at that particular stage, because I was far more turn-based, and so wasn't as despite my age, perhaps as dexterous as I needed to be in that sort of thing, and quick thinking, and just comfortable in that sort of format. I don't know, because I certainly remember a few towards the back end that kicked my teeth in a little bit.
Yeah, it was
Angeal. But then I just go off and grind, and
it was Angeal penance that kicked my butt. And I saying that I didn't do any side quests in this game. I didn't do like the training room simulation or anything. I just mainlined it.
So that stuff's good fun too. I mean, it's simple enough. It's pretty straightforward.
It was just a time thing for me. I just was like, I want to get through this and experience the story mostly.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the combat I certainly felt like held up really well. It reminded me of aspects of Final Fantasy VII in the way it feels to like wield that sword in just like your basic attacks, and I liked that. I thought that they like it made me think like, was it this good in the original? And like it sounds like you're saying it was.
Well, yeah, that's certainly my memory of it. But again, I think there's some of that context that kind of clouds, and I think a little bit more in clouds, but that kind of obscures that a little bit because I just didn't have that confidence, proficiency, or even experience with that sort of thing. So, but it's certainly in terms of where it stacks up time wise, yeah, it's certainly ahead of its time. Yeah. I can't argue that.
And it starts off in this game kind of quite basic when you don't have as many abilities, and I found myself in the early part of the game kind of like rushing through fights or even trying to avoid them because they weren't as fun. But then as you get more powerful, they become a lot more enjoyable, which is, I guess that's probably the case with most of these games.
Yeah,
they ease you into it. So the thing that aside from the combat and that feel that was beyond its time really, that I thought held up the best was the fan service. I didn't love the story elements of this game that were completely original aside from what we already knew in Final Fantasy VII. We'll get to those in what holds up the worst, but as soon as like Aerith shows up and you're at the church and you're talking about flowers and you're seeing Sephiroth and you're seeing
and his gradual descent and those sorts of things.
And you're seeing Cloud and you got a Nibelheim. Like when all these things were happening that were what I would consider fan service to people that love Final Fantasy VII, I was all about it. But then as soon as all that stuff's gone, I'm just like, who are these characters? Who's this Genesis and Angeal?
Angeal, yes. Genesis, no, for reasons that we'll discuss shortly. But...
yeah, there's just a lot. I mean, yeah, Angeal, I did like elements of that, but there was also things that I found kind of frustrating. So unless you want to say more about like what holds up well, I probably want to move into like what doesn't hold up so well.
No, let's flip it.
Yeah. Okay, so to start with, as far as the gameplay goes, I didn't really like any of the mini games. They felt like kind of ham-fisted in, and like Final Fantasy VII had tons of mini games, but they were all like, in my view, they were all really fun. And in this time round, it just felt like they were teaching you a new thing to momentarily use. Like when you have to chop down the bombs as they come into the village, that was kind of like weird, and it was like weirdly animated and timed as well. Then there's the sequence when you have to track down Bruno in the village, the kid, and I was just like, can this section be
that's
over?
quite bloated. Yeah.
And then you've like the sniper sections, which like they're fine, but they just feel so weird and out of place in a Final Fantasy VII game to be like suddenly it's a first person shooter or whatever. So they, for me, felt very dated, and maybe back then it was like, oh, let's just add some different elements to give people some variety. But I think almost it's hard to say that there's any such thing as a consensus in games, because there's not. But I feel like best practice often is the case of don't introduce a mechanic that's used once and that's it.
I guess that kind of shows I guess is representative of the time though. I mean, lots of games were, I mean, the bomb chopping thing, like it's a rhythm thing, so it's kind of drawing on what's popular at the moment.
Yeah.
Guitar Hero and those rhythm sort of based things. It's obviously far lighter, but it's trying to embrace that sort of thing. And you would see QTEs, how can we bring those in, because God of War's doing that so well. Yeah, and look, that was very much what a lot of games were doing at the time. So how can we grab this element and grab this element? And they'd get stuck in there, but then, as you say, it felt really disjointed as a result. And yeah, I completely agree. Those parts are absolutely the weakest parts of Crisis Core.
Oh, I'm glad.
When they deviate from what the game is meant to be, that's when it starts to struggle.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, I don't... It's almost like in, I guess the modern version would be like Days Gone, when you start picking flowers for 10 minutes, Or, to use a more modern example, God of War Ragnarok. I'm not going to spoil anything, but there's a long sequence when you're not fighting anyone, and it's kind of like, what are we doing here? At least I felt like that. So yeah,
games are 10, but that was a weaker moment. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a, there's a. What do you think of the dialogue in this game? Because these JRPGs and Final Fantasy games, especially, they don't always have the best dialogue, and especially when it's getting voiced, it's hard to avoid that kind of over the top anime style that some people love, other people don't necessarily love. And I think Genesis is probably like the worst example.
Well, that was my one main thing when it came to kind of what holds up the worst is Genesis. Like if I mean, I'm done with Reunion now, but like if I heard him talk about Loveless again, I might have just jumped through the screen and assaulted the guy.
It's just
so
over the top and
melodramatic stuff.
Weak. Like
yeah.
It's not, and it doesn't feel like how people talk. Even someone who's crazy and obsessed with a play, it almost just felt like they're like, oh, Loveless is something that's been established in the canon of Final Fantasy VII. Let's bring it into the main story. And it's like, no, don't. And
it's really nothing that anyone cares about in the core of Final Fantasy VII either. For most people, it's a building with the word Loveless written on it.
It's a poster.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like based on, I think it's based on like an album artwork or a stage show artwork that's famous from that era. But yeah, it's difficult to stomach at times.
Yeah, that was kind of my main thing, and so I can totally understand. So for me, it was almost purely the Genesis component, but I can certainly see how you or anyone else might extrapolate beyond just that point as well. I like Angeal, but I can see where he kind of delves into that sort of space a little bit and tries to get a little bit too deep and meaningful in ways that actually can kind of maybe be counter to that.
Yeah, use your sword, man. Use your sword. Yeah. It's a good sword.
Yeah, it's stuff like that. So I can totally understand it as much as those other aspects didn't bother me, as opposed to Genesis, who can die in a Nibelheim fire. Yeah.
So the last thing that I wanted to talk, well, it's kind of a two-pronged thing, but the last thing I want to talk about is this idea of the demystifying of Sephiroth and the one-winged angels. So I said before how cool it was to see Sephiroth, but it's kind of like too much of a good thing in some ways, because in Final Fantasy VII, like I gotta say, to me, he's one of my favorite villains in games. Like, I played this game as a kid. Every time he showed up, I pooped my pants. Like, he was just so scary
the atmosphere goes
figure.
Through the roof.
And the music that plays when he shows up, and the fear that everyone in the game has of this figure is just like, he's like an urban legend, basically. And to see so much of him in this game, and just to see him like casually talking to people, and he's probably got a flip phone as well, and it's just like, I don't know, it's kind of like
just imagine Sephiroth taking selfies for a second.
Yeah, it's just kind of like takes away the mystique a little, and I'm just like, oh, it's almost too much of a good thing, and I like it more when there's more of a mystery. But I guess like you had to do it, so it's maybe not fair to say that it holds up the worst, but I thought it was worth mentioning. And then the other side of this is the one-winged angels thing, which I felt like in 7, the one-winged angel was a like a supernatural thing. It was Sephiroth's final form. It's like the final boss fight of the game.
Yep.
It's not like you're walking down the street and, oh, there's a guy over there with a one wing. That's a weird thing to see, and I'll just keep walking. Whereas in this game, there's just one-winged angels everywhere.
There's just people popping up left, right, and center. Do you ever watch? I'm drawing a reference for people watching and listening here. I tend not to, as much as I love this one particular anime, I don't typically wander into this space. Were you ever a Dragon Ball person?
Like a passing,
like
you didn't follow it, but it was on in the morning, so occasionally I checked it out. Yeah.
I just distinctly remember like Vegeta at one point, who's kind of considered, for a period, like one of the more antagonistic sort of characters. He eventually finds himself on the right side, but he's still kind of a bit abrasive and a bit of an arsehole. And he discovers at one point that it's been like his life's journey to finally become this Super Saiyan. Then all of a sudden, his kid, who's like 5 or 6, is just bouncing around with Goku's kid, who's also the Super Saiyan. They're just fooling around and think it's the funniest thing in the world, and he's just, this thing has just become a child's play toy. And it's the exact same sort of thing here. Like, oh, we're just throwing One-Winged Angels out like it's candy.
It'll be like kids just walking around with lightsabers, like in Star Wars. It's like you should have a bit more reverence for this thing. It's a big deal.
Any wonder Anakin got you. You weren't showing respect. Sorry, spoilers for Revenge of the Sith people.
Yeah. So yeah, it's like, are the One-Winged Angels just like commonplace? And I know like they tried. It just felt like they were kind of retconning what it was to say that like these guys were the original. Sephiroth came after them. He's like the better version of them. But seeing them in just everyday situations and not boss fights or whatever, it just and even like just watching them fly with one wing was kind of like I'm not like a physicist, but that seems like impossible.
Oh, it's 100% impossible, but I guess that's the beauty of fiction. And I guess you can. I mean, that's something that you'll have to get your head around with Reunion, because we know it's going to happen more and more.
It looks weird. So, anyway, how did you feel? Like, how do you feel in like
Rebirth,
the broader sense about One-Winged Angels just being everywhere, seemingly?
Yeah, I think it's much as you say, and even with my little ham-fisted Dragon Ball reference there, like it is like they demystifying, as you said, it's a really, really good word for it, because it does break down this image that we established based on the core Final Fantasy VII and what we believe it to be, and all of a sudden, you and maybe I can be one too if I just try hard enough.
Yeah.
I'll just sprout one out here.
Yeah,
like it breaks that down a little bit.
Yeah, it introduces like supernatural powers into like the rules of this universe seem to be like, yes, there are monsters and weird things, but people are people, and Sephiroth has to like combine with the ancients' power, or like I'm trying to think like what's the life stream and all this all these things to actually advance to another level and become his ultimate form or whatever. But here it's just like, yeah, I feel like being a One-Winged Angel now, as you said, sprout out the wing. So yeah, it kind of, I don't love that they, from my perspective, retconned what that was to add something that they probably thought people would think was cool, but just kind of makes it less special.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. And the timeline of it complicates things more for all those reasons.
Yeah, so I'm going to try and forget about that anyway. Where can you see the influence of Crisis Core in games that came after it? And I think Final Fantasy VII would be like the main remake, but
for sure.
Other, Final Fantasy VII Remake would be the main example, is what I meant to say. But, there's plenty of other action JRPGs that have come since then that use the more real-time combat.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, it was really tip of the spear. Obviously, within Final Fantasy, I mentioned 12 came out a couple of years prior, and that was kind of half a step in that direction. 7 was even further. 13 was even further, despite the myriad of issues with 13.
15 definitely has that feel to it.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is, 13, like, the combat was absolutely the strongest part. 15 obviously leans heavily into it. 7 Remake, obviously 16 is very action focused. Like, it was the tip of the spear for that, and it led the way for a lot of JRPGs as well. At the end of the day, Final Fantasy is the granddaddy of the whole genre. It's not the oldest out there, but it is long been the leader.
It feels like it would be like the highest selling of the
exactly of
the genre. Yeah,
I mean, I certainly think about the ebbs and flows of the JRPG genre. Even like it peaked in that kind of Super Nintendo PS1 era, and that's when you're talking about Final Fantasy 6 and 7 and 9, of course. Like the absolute pinnacles of the whole thing. And there was a bit like, I love 10, but I don't consider it quite in that but also through that same PS2 period when we're seeing 10 with a slight decline, 12 excellent, but again not that same sort of quality, and then the big drop off that we saw at the PS3 era. The whole genre was ebbing and flowing at the same pace that Final Fantasy was. Like, I really feel like when they were on the money, then the rest of the genre would follow suit. And Crisis Core was kind of the point where they would start to elevate things again. It took quite a while, but they were the ones that kind of started to steer people in the right direction through what they did with Crisis Core, I think.
Yeah, that seems pretty clear, and I'm glad. Like when I was talking before about like things that don't hold up in the gameplay, I didn't mention that like because especially because I've played 7 Remake, I felt like I wanted to use the sword all the time outside of battle to like smash boxes and things like that.
Boxes.
But instead of that, there's an interactive thing like press X to smash the box, and that kind of thing felt like a real like from a
reminder
game
of when the game came out.
Yeah. That was a thing of like they're very much separated what's action and that the player can interact with compared to the way things are now. Like the distinction between this is a gameplay section and this is a
the
combat
different states
section.
of gameplay.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was trying to say. I feel like it's a bit more loose and flowing now, and that certainly stood out when every time I tried to smash a box and I couldn't swing my sword around. But anyway, we're now going to talk briefly about some of the characters in this game as we hand out the Morden Solace Omnitool Award, which is awarded to the character that kind of just shows up and does their thing and, steals the show. There's, obviously those main characters that we talked about before, but as far as like the side characters, I think like when Aerith's on screen is probably the main thing for me, because there's so much affection and
the
baggage.
Music kicks in. And, baggage.
Yeah, emotional baggage that comes with that character, and the arc that you see, and like even like the way that her relationship with Zack mirrors her relationship with Cloud. It kind of makes me think like, what, you just fall in love with every guy that falls through the roof, do you? Like, makes Cloud feel
Absolutely.
a bit less special. Then you got the Turks, who are just really cool characters. I love when they show up in every game.
The delivery's always good with them.
Yeah, and it was cool to see them realized as 3D models, probably for the first time when this game came out.
Well, I guess they were 3D models in 7 as well, but pretty rough ones.
Yes, I guess. Yeah, you're totally right. When I say 3D models, I probably should say high
more than
res,
about 4 or 5 blocks stacked on top of one
not
another.
4 polygons connected together. Yeah. That was cool. But I think I'll give the award to Aerith, who is played by Andrea Bowen. I don't know if that's like, did they use the same voice actors as 7 Remake?
No, which is something I am confused by. I don't quite understand what the rationale is in that particular thing there, because
did they re-record the dialogue?
Yeah, they re-recorded dialogue, so why wouldn't you go with the new voice actors?
Weird. Yeah. Maybe it's a union thing. Who knows?
Yeah,
Anyway,
possibly.
Does Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core pass the internet relevancy test via memes and GIFs? I'm going to say no. Like, I don't think this thing... I mean, maybe in 2008 it was memed, but I don't think that it stood the test of time just in that small area. What do you think?
There's only one thing that kind of pops up a little bit when it comes to Gongaga and all that sort of stuff. Like, you'll see that pop up, especially like when the reviews dropped. I remember Kieran Verbuge from Well Played and Press Start that like was all over it. At the moment those reviews dropped, he was just thrilled to start sharing all those screenshots with the text there and all that, and it's funny. Like, I can appreciate that, but
yeah, that's nice.
But yeah, that would be the only thing, and I would still, with you, I would say no for the most part.
Yeah, certainly not compared to other games.
Not even close.
Yeah, and I think that could just come down to like less people played this game than other big games, even though it is a Final Fantasy VII, franchise. So is Dirge of Cerberus and a bunch of other ones that people probably either had less interest in or they didn't have a PSP like I didn't. So, yeah, I'm glad that people like me have had a chance to access this for the first time in a lot of instances.
So you definitely feel it was a worthwhile thing, though? Like, considering you missed it, and obviously you'd seen and heard things, and you've got the context of remake and all that sort of stuff, this was a worthwhile journey for you?
Yeah, definitely. And like, let's just go to that last question, and we'll circle back on the agenda. But is it still a good game? Yes. I think I had
if they didn't tweak the mechanics, like, and polished up in the ways that they have, it would have been problematic. Like, if it was a more traditional remaster, that would have been really problematic.
Sure. Yeah. See, I can't compare to what it was like to play in 2008 on a small screen that you're holding in your hands.
Well, it's the one stick versus the twin sticks, and the way they've kind of remapped things in that sense.
Yeah.
Just like the amount of control you have, even like it's just some of those fundamental aspects.
But as far as like, what's it like to play? What's this game called? Reunion? Crisis Core Reunion. What's it like to play this game for the first time? It's still a good game. It wasn't in my like top 10 for games of the year, but if someone put it in there, I wouldn't be like against that for their personal preference. There's elements that are dated that probably knock it down in my eyes, but overall, if you like action RPGs, or if you're really into the lore and canon of Final Fantasy VII, then there's plenty here to get into and to appreciate and to love. And you know, there's people like Brendan and Jack, who we're both friends with, who I feel like their first, well, not Jack, but Brendan's first entry into Final Fantasy, I think, is Final Fantasy VII Remake. And I know Jack never played Final Fantasy VII, so his first experience of these characters was Remake. And for people like that, if they have the time, I think Crisis Core will add to your enjoyment of whatever comes next in those franchises that are still going.
But at the same time, go back and play the original Final Fantasy VII. You need that context before we get to Rebirth.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to recommend a game that's that old for people that weren't there at the time. That's the harder thing. Because, I go back and play that game and I still love it, but it's hard to know, like, would everyone appreciate it? And it's easy to play because you can, like, the versions that are out
dial the damage up.
You can speed them up. You can use guide mode or whatever. You can, like, just get through the story quite easily. But, you know, I appreciate, especially someone like Brendan, trying to play everything, playing way too much Fortnite. It's not gonna. It's probably never gonna happen. But anyway,
just gotta drop Fortnite.
Sorry,
just gotta drop Fortnite. That's all it takes.
I would agree with that. Just stop watching so much anime, Brendan.
Well, that too.
This is basically an anime, but without the annoying voices.
But also with some annoying voices still.
Yeah, but not on the PS1. There's no annoying voices.
Oh yeah, PS1. Sorry,
yeah. So you agree that it's still a good game?
Oh, absolutely. Loved my time going back to it. Relished the opportunity. Been longing for the opportunity for a long time. Been cursing Square Enix for a long time for not making that PSP version available, but they've now done it the right way. So I'm stoked that it's out there. I guess I'm curious to see what they do with Rebirth, because that may just guide me towards another playthrough because of it. We'll just have to wait and see what happens there. So, really, really happy that it's back out there and that a new audience gets to experience it, that I just get to re-experience it. It's awesome.
And trophies. Did you play?
Well, there's that too. Yeah. No,
It looks like a hard platinum.
I don't think it's anything ridiculous, but I just... Yeah, I think you got a hard mode along the way, which is not something I'm willing to do right now anyway.
Yeah. Maybe one day.
If I'm not going to get the plat with the original game or remake, which I haven't, then I'm not going to rush to make this one the outlier.
Okay. So that would have been the last question, but we've got this next one to wrap things up. Could you make this today? I think this game could come out today as a new game, and it would be a lot more like Remake in the way that, you know, obviously it would look a bit better. There'd be more cohesion between what's gameplay and what's exploration, as far as, like, you could use your sword to break boxes and stuff like that, which we referred to. Interesting thing about this game, you only play as Zack. There's no party, which is, I'm going to say, probably the only...
Final Fantasy.
Yeah, it's probably the only time in a mainline-ish Final Fantasy world that's been possible. I haven't played every single one of them, but...
I can't I can't think of anything. Like MMOs are kind of a weird.
Yeah,
like, I think,
11 maybe. Yeah.
11/14 we can kind of discount, like throw them out, but they're just because of the nature of what they are. The traditional Final Fantasy single player thing.
I think you would.
I can't think of it.
If it was made now, I think you would have a party, and it would be more like 7, the combat style of 7. But yeah, otherwise, I think that everything else in the game has aged well enough that it would exist. They'd probably take out the mini games or make them feel more relevant and better. But all things considered, it could easily slot in alongside, the majority of JRPGs and be probably better than most of them, I think.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It holds up well. It holds up really well.
All right, well, dear listeners, thanks for checking out Video Game Book Club. Of course, you're on the Hungry Gamers feed right now, and there'll be the return of the Hungry Gamers before too long. They're in the middle of their festive break, recovering from another year of delivering you the news and other good, fun, bite-sized pieces of gaming content. But until they're back, you can share the podcast with your friends, subscribe if you haven't already, grab your 8-bit merch over at shop8bit.net. You can follow us on, you can help support us on Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/weare8bit to help keep the emotional lights on. There'll probably be some news not too far away about what we're doing with our Ko-fi supporters this year. But until then, Paul, thank you for joining us.
Not a problem at all. It's good to talk Final Fantasy. It's good to chat to you again.
Yeah, it is. And yeah, until the Hungry Gamers return, I guess we can be the ones to say much love and stay hungry.